right, so the topic of my talk is tomorrow's creative teams. RGA has been a bunch of different companies, even in the time that I've been there, which is 16 years. We've sort of been a different sort of company every few years. So for us, curating a creative team is a very different thing, because when we're making different things every few years, we have to reconsider the team. But there is, in our industry at least, there is this reverence for yesterday's creative team. And it's been pretty resilient, and still to this day works pretty well. But to understand, I think, the power of the sort of original creative team in the advertising industry, I think you need to sort of go back and understand what came before it. Because there was a time, in fact, most of advertising history, the creative team was a writer. It was a writer coming out with ads. And then when the idea was baked and the ad was thought through, it was sent downstairs to some hapless copywriter, with the drafting table. And the sort of work that sort of came out of that, sort of appropriately at the time, was work that tended to be very descriptive. It usually talked about a benefit. Sometimes it used a pun, right? But it was mostly informational, so it looked like this sort of thing. And as we all know, Bill Bernbach, he'd already experimented with pair in the art director and copywriter, I think, with Gray before he got to DDB. But then, when he did that, the results was sort of pretty amazing. And there's a whole body of work which you can't imagine this happening without an art director copywriter team. This is this sort of beautiful tension between image and word, and there's a gap between the two that you have to fill in. It's sort of charming and beautiful. And it could only have happened with this great innovation of pairing art with copy. In fact, I think one of the early people that worked on some of this stuff was Paul Rand, who was one of the great designers. So this sort of level of craft and thoughtfulness and this sort of interesting gap between image and word was this thing that sort of launched the creative revolution. But you have to remember, though, that this was in the late 50s, and the world was very different then. So what launched the creative revolution, was this art director copywriter team, and there were really basically three channels, right? There was print, radio, and TV. And TV became, after this, more important as a sort of as a creative medium. But the thing is, it was still a very different world to now. If you imagine all the channels we have now, these three are the ones that sometimes feel like the least important. But the other thing about when this team was created was that it was a very different time culturally. It was coming out of the Second World War, and this sort of this new, after years of austerity, this sort of new wealth was coming into America during the 50s, and this sort of consumerist culture grew out of this sort of desperation of leaving behind the austerity that was. And so there was this game that was played between companies and consumers, which consumers were very happy to be involved with. They wanted to play the game. They had this disposable income all of a sudden. There was like 3 brands in every category, and they wanted to know which ones to buy, so the sort of cultural context of advertising not only was sort of shaped by the limited channels, but also by a culture that really wanted to consume and so enjoyed advertising. Of all the things that have changed, I think that's the most profound one, is that we now have a whole generation, especially younger people, that have completely decoded advertising. They don't really trust it. They can be entertained by it. They can be informed by it. But it's not like they're waiting breathlessly to be told what to buy. So all of these things sort of changed. So now I'm going to quickly go through a little evolution of our creative team, because as I said, we didn't, Bob started as a production company. When I started, I actually started in 2001, we were 100 people, and we were what was known then as a web shop. We made websites. And there was something about websites at that time. They were basically hyperlinked brochures. And so, one of the first clients that started to shape how we thought of from a team perspective was Nike. And the team that we sort of employed as a sort of web shop was this. We had experience design. We called it interaction design at the time. We had visual design, and there were the people that could design interfaces. There was copywriting, of course, because there were words, and then we had a tech team which was sort of integrated into that and considered creative. And so, the sort of work that came out of that was websites. Now, what we became good at was doing a little bit more than what websites were being asked for at the time. So we started to do things in engorged Flash. We broke all the Jacob Nielsen rules of usability. We put the global nav down the bottom. We had things popping up. We treated it with a certain amount of experimentation within the sort of the limitations of the medium. But the interesting thing about putting a creative team against the web at the time was the web changed very rapidly, and it went from this hyperlink brochure to a place where you could design something, right? So we did the Nike ID, and all of a sudden we weren't just disseminating information. What we were doing was affecting the supply chain of Nike. It was affecting their e-commerce sort of growth, and then we worked on this little skunk works thing on the side, which became really the first mass IoT product, right? Which is Nike Plus. Began as a pod in a shoe, and sort of developed into software that span across a smartphone, wearables, and a whole bunch of things like that. And so using that creative team of those 4 disciplines, we were able to do that and innovate on top of what was going on the web. So our relationship with Nike has been for 16 years now, and more recently, because of the stuff that came before, because of the services that we created that helped Nike become not just a product company, but a product and service company, there's this inevitability about if you're creating stuff that is helping athletes through software, and you're giving them data to help them perform better, and you're getting that data back, there's sort of an inevitability to what that will mean to the relationship you have with your consumer. So where Nike is going more recently is around this idea of membership, right? So it's a more sophisticated and sympathetic CRM, right? Because they've got all of this data, and they're serving their audiences through interfaces. So I'm going to show you the first of a few case studies, and this one is going to show you where we are in that relationship, and recognizing that with modern marketing now and the importance of data, and also for us, understanding how media plays not just as a place to sort of buy eyeballs, but also to sort of find the right people at the right time. I'm going to show you this little case study. It was actually piloted in Germany, in the belly of the beast of Adidas, and it's sort of become a prototype for a lot of things that we'll be doing for Nike going forward. So all of that was done. It was nothing, really. All that was done without this team. And interestingly, in parallel to this long relationship we had with Nike, anyone that's worked with Nike knows that they're very good at getting the best out of their agencies. Sometimes that means that they typecast you a little bit. And so we tended to be the sort of innovation agency. And it was only very recently that we got the opportunity to do some work that was more sort of classic narrative work. And I'm going to show you some of that. And the point is that for our Nike team, culturally, they were very used to having systematic thinkers, right? They had designers and experienced designers and technologists and even media and data I would consider a systematic way of thinking. And so, we had the sort of inverse issue to a lot of more traditional agencies where when we introduced the sort of the high-fiving, backwards baseball cap ad team to that culture, it was very odd. And for us, integrating this team into specifically the Nike team has been probably the opposite of what a lot of you guys have experienced. But I'll show you some work that we did recently for Nike Basketball. So it's only very recent that we've become sort of students of the more narrative advertising that sort of pays homage to some of the great work that is done before by Wyden. But we developed our sort of house style, narrative house style, and the way art directors and copywriters work, primarily by working with Beats. So they came to us in 2012 when they were just a startup, and we helped them work on some London Olympics stuff. And our approach was very on the ground, systematic, behavioral. And for us, the idea of just making sure that athletes wear the product and encourage them to wear the product by putting their country's colors on it seemed like a really good idea. And it really worked. And it was at a time when you could do guerrilla marketing around the Olympics without the IOC spanking you for not being an official sponsor. We ended up doing some TV and stuff also. And we've developed this sort of house style around narrative work, which was exemplified by work that we did, with Kevin Garnett and Colin Kaepernick with the Hear What You Want campaign, where I think this art director copywriter team was influenced heavily by the experience designer culture. So we've had a large experience design team at RGA for over a decade. And what you, as an experience designer, you think about is how to be an advocate for the user. No one's going to use your software if it doesn't work for the user. It's very different. When you buy media, you often don't ask that question, why would someone use it? Because the answer is you're going to interrupt them while they're watching the football, right? But my point is, with experience designers hanging out with art directors, copywriters, you start to have this sort of shift, and you start thinking about not just what the brand wants to say and how to push it down into the world, but what does the audience want to say? What are the audience going to be not only receptive to, but what are they going to want to share? How do you say something to the audience that they want to already say? So we created this whole philosophy around narrative work, which eschewed metaphors, eschewed all of the tropes of advertising, tried to make things look less like advertising and more like stuff that's going to make the audience look good, and then ultimately make the brand look good. And so we had some huge success around the World Cup with a spot with Neymar Jr. and with some ad council work. And we've actually got very good at creating social-first narrative work. And most of the time when we do that, we create the story as long as it needs to be before then cutting it down for TV, right? So we don't start with TV, we start with the stream and then figure out how that works. And then we also had the opportunity when we were working with Beats to sort of combine these two teams and have, I think, one of the broadest sort of projects that we've ever done. This is a little bit of an old project, but it just shows when you get a sort of myriad of expertise together, and then connect them, that you can come up with some stuff that's very integrated, is the word advertising would use.
What if you had the perfect music for every moment? Kisses would be deeper, drives faster, inspiration would flow, and life would be infused with magic. And to do that, you'll need more inside your skull than a circuit board, because code can't hear the Bowie in a band's influences. It doesn't know why the Stones segue perfectly into Aretha Franklin. You'd want brains and souls. We've created an elegant, fun solution that integrates the best technology with friendly, trustworthy humanity. That understands music as emotion and joy, culture, and life. Music is much more than just digital files. It breathes and bleeds and feels. The only thing as important as the song you're hearing now is the song that comes next.
Now I don't know who you are, but girl, I wanna know if you can move like
This is a completely new way to experience music, and the next step in the evolution that's taken us from 45s to CDs to streaming. But the most important thing about it is that you'll be blown away by what happens when you hit play. The right music, like magic.
So the important thing there is that we had this broad team, and because we designed the product, we had a very different approach than the narrative work, right? We developed this sort of this approach called heightened demos. So the Ellen DeGeneres spot, it was sort of a magical world, but it was a demonstration of the product. You're very sensitive to that when you actually design the product. So, and what that shows is that we started with the behavior, right? And then it was after we figured out the behavior, then we figured out how the message fits in with the behavior. So it changes the sort of process that you would have if you were sort of disembodied from the product itself. It becomes more design-led. So that was a sort of broad design a product, do a huge campaign, do a Super Bowl spot, very expensive, although I think it paid off for them when they got bought by Apple for $3.5 billion. I think that's right. But you can also apply the same team and structure to a much smaller thing. The next thing I'm going to show you cost a few $100,000. It was hugely successful, but it similarly had this very eclectic mix of talents involved.
In the summer of 2015, Universal Pictures partnered with Beats by Dre to promote Straight Outta Compton, the biopic movie of the headphone company's founding father and billionaire rap mogul, Dr. Dre, growing up in one of the most notorious neighborhoods in the world.
tell them where you're from. Straight Outta Compton.
What Beats realized is this isn't just about Compton. Everyone is proud of where they're from. So we launched an integrated campaign that celebrated every city in the world, because we're all straight outta somewhere. Hashtag Straight Outta became a universal statement for everyone to rep their city. People could create their own custom memes to rep their own hometowns by simply typing in their city name and uploading an image. Across the world, people created their own hashtag Straight Outta memes. The world's biggest celebrities joined in without receiving any endorsement money from Beats.
You are straight out of upstate New York.
That's right, yeah.
In less than 24 hours, it became the #1 trending topic on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. No other brand in history has ever achieved this.
That shit was dope, man.
The world took over, and no one or nothing was safe. Other brands couldn't ignore the campaign's success and got involved. Even the United Nations harnessed the campaign's power for good. Then what happened next surprised us all. President Obama created his very own hashtag #StraightOutOfMeme.
Instead of using the word straight out of Compton, the White House tweeted Iran would be, quote, straight out of uranium.
In the end, it not only became Beat's biggest campaign ever, but the biggest social campaign of 2015.
So unlike the thing you saw before, which was led by design and then sort of messaging sort of dovetailed into the design, that was actually led by an art director copywriter team, but an art director copywriter team that was influenced by the systematic thinking that that is in the agency, and speak the principle that I was talking about before, which was that how do you give the audience something that says more about them than mass, is perfectly exemplified there. It literally is this little tool which says more about the audience, and then is disseminated by the audience, and therefore the brand gets this sort of credit. So we have this sort of construct for coming up with ideas, which is when we have these broad disciplined teams, where we don't start here, right? So if the industry, because of the media that's been at its disposal for 50 years, has been about how do we distill what the client wants to say and then push it down into the world as a story, we now live in this world which very recently, for advertising history, emerges where this sort of system exists, where we're behaving within that system. Sometimes, and actually most of the time now, given the rise of social, where brands actually don't have a big part. And we have agency over that media because there's an interface in front of it, right? So the appearance of an interface in front of almost all media changes it from this top-down to this very bottom-up thing. And one of the problems our industry has struggled with is that these two things have, for the last decade or so, often been done by a different agency. So you have above-the-line agency that more often than not has a higher-level relationship with the clients, and they're saying, let's figure out the story first, and then we'll push it down into different expressions. And then, up until very recently, most of the people that played in the bottom were these punky little digital utopians that were trying to tell their client that advertising was stupid, all they needed was utility, and so they had their own sort of problems. The problem is that they never met, and often a brand would live very differently in a message than it would as a behavior. And so for us, the most important thing when we get these teams together is to go up this whole idea, a whole idea that is both a message and a behavior. And why this is important is because for us, it's a lot easier to start with a behavior than a message, right? It's very difficult to always turn a message into a behavior. It's really fucking easy to turn a behavior into a message. So there's a sort of a strange logic to that. We have to invert this sort of process of always starting with like this perfectly distilled tagline and then figuring out how it lives in the world, and think about the world first and how it works as a system, and then figure out how the story sort of fits into that. So what's next? I've got no bloody idea. I mean, who knows what our teams are going to look like in the next few years. But I will say that there is a sort of universal truth to what makes a good creative, and I think therefore what makes a good sort of creative organization, and that is that creative people need to understand what they're doing. They need to understand their clients. Great thing about our industry is we get to learn about a lot of industries, and we can't skimp on the knowledge piece. We need to know about what we're doing, right? What is true of great creative people also is they're sort of obsessed. All the good people, and this is why we often have more than one marriage, is that we work really fucking hard, and we sort of get obsessed with things, and we stay late, not because we couldn't come up with an idea, but because we wanted to come up with a better idea. But maybe I think the most important thing, and we were actually talking about this morning in a separate discussion, is courage. That is the most important thing as a creative person. You've got to have big ovaries. It's really important. So I'd say that's a universal thing. It doesn't matter what happens to our industry, what we're making. If you're creative and you have a creative team, you need to be thinking about that. But then sort of going back to where we've landed as a sort of framework, if we were to, I was talking about this before, like the highest framework for us is stories and systems. Because what that represents is, I think, the simplest way of looking at how we process things creatively, right? So it's really the difference between narrative thinking and design thinking, right? It's the difference between a brain that processes things one at a time and a brain that processes things all at once. A brain that's really good at understanding the power of a revealed moment, and a brain that understands the power of relationships and patterns. They're very different. And one of the reasons that this framework grew up at RGA was because I found early on when we started to do advertising that all the people that were more systematic did really shit advertising. They weren't very good at telling stories. They were systematic thinkers. And I saw outside in the larger industry, narrative teams, art directors, copywriters coming up with really bad digital ideas, bad app ideas, things that failed dismally, that put it, So I'm not saying that there aren't some talents that are broad, but typically I think you've got to recognize these are two very different ways of thinking and treat them both as creative. That's probably the most important thing, because we had an industry in advertising that saw narrative thinking as the only flavor of creativity. And everything came out of that, right? And once we got the story right, then we just apply it to everything else. And it's a profound misrepresentation of what creative thinking is. So we have this equality between these two ways of thinking. When I'm feeling particularly zen, I like to just say it's the difference between time and space. That's this is the world. You can't take those two things apart, right? We're not going to have a time department and a space department. We live in time and space, so they work together. This brain needs to be lateralized. And when I know it's working, when I look across our offices and I look at the balance of systematic thinking and storytelling, to me it's this balance between simplicity and possibility. Classically, narrative thinkers are subtractive. They're very good at coming up with this distilled brand thought. Systematic thinkers, because they're combining new things and creating new things, they're really good at innovation. They're good at possibility. So if I've got an office where we're telling good stories but not innovating, it means I need more systematic balance. If I've got an office that's innovating but can't tell a simple brand story, then we need to bump up the narrative side, the story side. In our US organization, these two people represent those two things. So almost all of our offices have a head of story and a head of system. So, Taurus is a classic copywriter. He's a narrative thinker. And Chloe was trained as an experienced designer. She's a systematic thinker. They work together. We don't have a digital department and an advertising department. They assess every piece of work we do around that framework of the whole idea. Is this a perfect intersection of a behavior and a message? So I'm going to end with two case studies which I think sort of point to a future of the sort of work that we're going to be doing. Because this work is sort of in fields that are emergent, I'm sure we'll look back at both of these case studies in a few years and go, that's ridiculous. I can't believe they did that shit back then. So treat these as one of those expanded banners that Brazilian agencies did in Cannes about 10 years ago. We all thought were really cool and we don't see anymore. But what both of these things I think represent is that neither of these pieces could be done without this intersection of story and system, right? They're both dependent on both of those things working together, right? And because they're things that are going to be more important in the future, then I think that the sort of framework that we have at its highest sort of organizing principle will be relevant for a while. So if the power of story is the revealed moment, then I think the power of these sorts of stories, these VR, is a revealed space, because you have agency over the space. So it's very interesting. You need to be able to think in a narrative fashion, but understand that you're revealing architecture. You're revealing a space, not a moment. And so it is this sort of perfect, especially more story-like VR experiences are going to depend on this sort of architectural way of thinking. It's almost like gaming, but it still needs a strong story. You still need the story. The story will be propelled not by the moment, but by the space. And so the last thing I'm going to show you is a collaboration with one of our startups where we created a very meta thing. It's actually the opposite to the richness and sort of technical presence of VR. This is like something that's as simple as, you know, what you'll get in a messaging app. But similarly, it requires a narrative thinker and a systematic thinker. And this is the case study where I think we might need to turn up the volume because it was mixed really low. But anyway, here we go.
Every big brand is building a chatbot. Bots help companies reach more people, sell more, and offer better customer service. Problem is, building a bot takes hundreds of hours. Coding, natural language processing, content mapping, testing, artificial intelligence, quality assurance, testing, bot deployment knowledge. All this costs money, which big businesses can afford, but small businesses can't. That's why the people at Reply.ai, a startup that builds chatbots, created me. I'm BotBot, the bot that builds bots. I can help small business owners with no technical expertise build messenger bots in just 5 minutes from their phones.
That's awesome!
I know, right? Here, I'll show you how. First, pick a bot template that fits your small business best. Like a fitness bot that books classes at gyms and fitness studios. Or an answer bot that answers your customers' most common questions. Or the food bot that helps with food delivery. So, let's say you have a restaurant. We chat on Messenger to create your bot. You can give it a name, connect it to the restaurant delivery service like Eat Street. Define the details of your service, and integrate your bot smoothly into your business. Finally, we publish it on your restaurant's Facebook page. And just like that, it's alive! Now anyone can order food from your bot. BotBot turns what used to be a complex and expensive development process into a simple conversation, and a simple conversation into new business.
Thanks, BotBot.
You're welcome, welcome.
So, you know, we started by talking about how the creative team used to be just a copywriter. What's interesting about this is the most important creative in this is a copywriter. It's all about tone. It's about, right, at the back end, you've got AI, you've got, you know, experience designers mapping out, you know, whole sort of decision trees and everything. But the tone of this is just copy. Yeah, and if you're going to do something like this successfully, the copy's really fucking important, right? So again, it's like, even though the difference between a VR experience and how immersive it is and this sort of, this messaging stream are like two ends of a complexity spectrum, they both depend on these two ways of thinking. In narrative, design, story system, and that is the end. Look at that, I did it.